Hey everyone, welcome to a recap and preview episode of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. Everything that's going on in March Madness, and it has been a mad March indeed. And Joe, I think that we got to start off with the biggest story of this tournament, and that's the St. Peter's peacocking around. And I mean, to be honest, I think this is an even cooler story than Florida Gulf Coast Dunk City a few years ago because they beat Kentucky, and it wasn't a average John Calipari Kentucky team. This was a Kentucky team who I think had the second best odds to win the national championship after only Gonzaga. And they did it in an impressive fashion. They did it in overtime. And you saw at the end of the game, they weathered some really great Kentucky runs. And they followed that up by beating Murray State, who was a very good 7 seed, and who I think a lot of Kentucky fans were worried about playing their in-state rivals and possibly losing in the second round. And so it wasn't a no-joke win they had in the second round either. And this St. Peter's team is the talk of the tournament.
Yeah, rightfully so. I'd never even heard of this university until last week or when they won their conference championship, and I was filling out the bracket. And yeah, I'd kind of like penciled in Murray State St. Peter's as the next round matchup and thought, Murray State might give them a game then. But quite frankly, I had Kentucky making it all the way to the Final Four in the national championship game in my bracket. So that definitely suffered immensely, I think, like a lot of people with Kentucky's loss. But the other takeaway, Dan, I think you could argue that this might even be a bigger upset than the UMBC Virginia upset a couple of years ago. And the reason I say that is DeAndre Hunter, one of the best players for Virginia, he missed that game for UVA. And also, this is Kentucky. This is the blue blood of blue bloods out there, really. And so just blown away that St. Peter's pulled this off.
I mean, Joe, I think that universally, if you were to ask college basketball fans what is the best program in college basketball, I think most would probably say Kentucky. I think you get the highest percentage of that. I mean, I think it'd be split a lot between, Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, and UCLA. I think the older people would say UCLA because of their 10 national championships with John Wooden and then their 1992 national championship. But I think that most people would probably say from a consistency standpoint, Kentucky's been the best program ever. I think they had the second most national championships with 8. And so in my mind, this is the biggest blue blood. And I think that makes it an even higher level. Virginia's a great basketball program. They have a lot of tradition. Of course, they won a national championship, but they're not a blue blood in my mind. I would consider them like kind of in that next rung of basketball programs. And so I think that makes the UMBC upset not quite as meaningful as this one.
Yes. In Kentucky, I think they're the all-time winningest program in college basketball history.
They are. And I mean, and you look at it like if they don't win the national championship, they make runs every year. And another thing is there's a lot of coaches that, go out early. Even Tom Izzo, the one who's known for making his deep runs in the NCAA tournament, he's had a lot of years where he went out early. Of course, we talked about Virginia. That's not the only time that's ever happened to them. But Calipari's been one that rarely gets knocked off early in the tournament. You feel like you see Kentucky make Elite Eights for the most part, like it's a rarity if they don't make the Sweet 16. And then you feel like Kentucky fans expect to at least go to the Elite Eight every year, if not the Final Four.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time he lost in the first round, even at Memphis or Kentucky, now that you mention it. But I did hear an interesting stat the other day, Dan, that not a single player on Kentucky's current roster had an NCAA tournament win.
Really? That's interesting because, I mean, you do have people like Oscar Tshiebwe on the team that have been there for a couple of years. But I guess you think about it, Kentucky last year had that team that was unprecedentedly bad, that didn't make the NCAA tournament. So it's a little bit different than what you're used to.
Yeah, they had not as a program been to the tournament, I guess, in 3 years.
Which is funny because everybody was talking about one of the strengths of this Kentucky team was their veteran leadership. I think this might tell you that maybe Calipari's way of just nailing it with the freshmen is what he needs to stick with, and he doesn't need to have older players on his team.
It definitely seems that way for sure.
But yeah, then moving on, they go out and beat a very good Murray State program. And suddenly this Shaheen Holloway, the coach of St. Peter's, I think is the hottest coach in college basketball. And I mean, to me, it seems all but a lock that he's going to be the next Seton Hall coach. Seton Hall's coach, of course, went to Maryland, and Shaheen Holloway played at Seton Hall. And, of course, he lives in Jersey City, which is, where St. Peter's is. I mean, I don't even know that he's going to have to get a new house if he wants to be Seton Hall's coach, Joe. I mean, he's just going right over the line into New York, doing the same commute that millions of people to do every day from New Jersey to New York. I mean, to me, it just seems like this is a match made in heaven, and that as soon as they lose to Purdue this week, or whichever game they lose, that Holloway is going to be signed up to be the next Pirates head coach.
No, I think you're right on track there, Dan, with that assessment.
Yeah. Joe, some other big stories. I mean, of course, St. Peter is not the only double-digit seed to make it to the Sweet 16. We have 3, which is a very high level. I feel like generally you're going to have 1. Sometimes you're going to have 2, but seeing 3 double-digit seeds make it to the Sweet 16 is quite rare because they're joined by Iowa State, who, of course, beat a coachless LSU team, which a lot of us saw coming, and then a Wisconsin team that won the Big Ten regular season with Illinois, but one that all of us knew was a limited team. They had to have Johnny Davis go out and be the best player in the country every night, and if Johnny Davis didn't do that, they were susceptible to being beat by anyone, and everybody knew that. And Iowa State showed that. So that was one that I actually had Iowa State in the Sweet 16. So that didn't shock me that much. But Miami being there is a complete and utter shock to me because we mentioned with St. Peter's that, of course, you had Kentucky in the championship game. I also had Kentucky in the championship game, Joe, and I had them losing to my Auburn Tigers in the national championship game. And the other double-digit seed that made it was, of course, Miami. And in what was an extremely disappointing performance, Miami just curb stomped Auburn in that game. And it was rough to watch, Joe. I mean, nobody had done that to Auburn all season. And Miami looked like legitimately the better team, the better prepared team, had a better game plan. And it was a real head-scratching performance that I just didn't see coming.
And so many people penciled in Miami as kind of the sleeper team at the tournament, but I didn't see that as a possibility. I actually had them losing USC in the first round because I thought USC was the better team. USC had been ranked all year. It challenged teams like Arizona and UCLA. So did not see that happening, but it did. In Miami now, you see them taking on Iowa State. Miami looks like they could really make a serious run here.
And Joe, Miami is one of these teams that really took advantage of the COVID year because you look at them, they have 3 sixth-year seniors on their team. They have 3 guys that are 24 years old playing on their team. And so you look at it, this is something that can happen with this extra year of eligibility that's put out there. And they showed it. I mean, they were more mature than Auburn. You could see the veteran leadership there. And it really starts with their point guard, Charlie Moore, who not only is a 6th-year senior, he's played at 4 different D1 schools, Joe. I mean, this guy, can you imagine the frequent flyer miles that he has? He started his career at Cal. Then he went to Kansas. Then he went to DePaul. And now he's at Miami, and now he's got a chance to play to get into the Elite 8.
Wow, that's like a cross-country trip. Like, that's about as far as you can go from school to school.
Yeah, I mean, he's played – you think about especially Cal to Miami, that's about as far as you can possibly make it. I guess if it was like Washington to Miami, that'd be like the only one that would be longer.
Right, exactly. Wow.
But, you got to say this. I mean, I was very impressed with the defensive prowess of Miami with how open they were able to get against Auburn. And Jim Larinaga is a guy who has been an excellent basketball coach for a while. I mean, he led his own St. Peter's-like team with George Mason making the Final Four in 2006. Mm-hmm. And you got to think that right now he's probably one of the better coaches out there that hasn't won a national championship. And I saw an interesting stat about Larinaga, Joe. He is the leading coach of all time in wins at 3 different schools. Which, I mean, how many people can say that? He's the leading coach now at Miami in wins. He was the leading coach at George Mason in wins. And I can't think of the third one, but there was another one, too, that he coached at before George Mason where he was their all-time winningest coach.
That's really impressive. And you look at their current roster, with the senior leadership you talked about, the defense is just really disruptive with their guards. And speaking of their guards, they run a 4-guard system, and that really makes it tough on the full court press.
It does. And I mean, they were a bad matchup for Auburn because their guards were superior to Auburn's. And the biggest problem was both of Auburn's best players had their worst game of the season in the same game. And that's what sunk them. I mean, I didn't think it was possible to see Walker Kessler be that bad. And Jabari Smith, I mean, he was awful in that game. I couldn't believe it. I mean, to me, I kind of felt like maybe he had been watching highlight reels of himself doing that posterizing dunk over Jacksonville State for 3 days and didn't prepare for this game because he looked horrible in it.
Yeah, and you thought if Auburn was going to lose, it was probably going to be the poor guard play. But here, you're right. It was kind of like the two best players not playing.
I thought the guards played perfectly fine. They played definitely well enough to win. I thought Katie Johnson and Wendell Green had pretty solid games. Zeb Jasper didn't do much offensively, but that's not really what his game is. And so I would have thought if you could have told me that both Wendell Green and Katie Johnson had solid games, that there'd be no way we'd lose. But there was no way you can anticipate that Walker and Jabari would play the worst games of their career and maybe was the last game of each of their careers.
Right. Very, very unexpected.
Yeah. So, that was a real thud into the season for Auburn and what otherwise was one of the best seasons in program history. You had an outright title in the SEC. You had a chance to be a number 1 seed, ended up being a 2 seed. You had your first ever number 1 ranking, and it ends in the second round to a 10th seeded Miami. And Joe, they're not the only ones in the SEC that ended up having a disappointing run. Look at Kentucky. They lost to St. Peter's. LSU goes out in the first round. Tennessee. And Joe, they were probably maybe at the end of the year more talked about in terms of SEC teams than anyone else. Everyone was all up in arms, ready to burn down the NCAA office about Tennessee being a 3 seed. And suddenly Tennessee goes out against an 11-seeded Michigan team that's had plenty of controversy. And you want to talk about someone that has had their scripts flipped in the last month. You and I were talking about how Juwan Howard probably should have been fired by Michigan. And now all of a sudden he's fresh off a win against one of the hottest teams in the country in Tennessee. And Michigan is sitting there as the lone representative one of the only 2 representatives of the Big Ten in the Sweet 16. And Arkansas is the only representative from the SEC in the Sweet 16. And so, everybody's been, banging the drum of how the SEC and the Big Ten were the best conferences this year. Pretty poor showing in the tournament so far.
Right. And instead, shockingly, you have the ACC and the Big 12 just doing so well right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the complete flip side is that this is supposed to be the weakest the ACC has ever been. Everyone's talking about it's Duke, it's a probably slightly underrated North Carolina team, and there's nothing else. Nobody really thought Miami was that good. They didn't even – Wake Forest, their coach got Coach of the Year in the ACC. They didn't even make the tournament.
They had the Player of the Year too, I think, in the ACC.
Yeah, and now you're looking at it, and Duke's in the Sweet 16, North Carolina's in the Sweet 16, Miami's in the Sweet 16, and definitely great showing for the ACC, and it shows that they maybe have better basketball than we thought they did, and maybe Kentucky and Auburn really were paper tigers in a league that wasn't quite as tough as everybody put it out there to be.
Right, absolutely, and the Big East looks pretty solid too with Providence and Villanova.
Absolutely. And Joe, I mean, going down the line of SEC teams, I thought another one that was really disappointing was Alabama. I mean, I saw it coming. I predicted that Alabama would lose that first round game, but I didn't think they would get ran out of the stadium like that by a team in Notre Dame that I was complaining even made the field.
Mm-hmm. And I think we've noticed, since the advent of the first 4, a team that wins that game has won like one of the first round games every year.
Yeah, it seems like they always get on a little bit of a run. They feel like maybe they're a little bit hated on by the committee. They got something to prove. And, yeah, I mean, Joe, every year I pick a team that wins in the first 4 to win that first game, if not make the Sweet 16, because I see that as something that really does drive programs to greatness in March.
Absolutely, for sure.
But, yeah, I mean – moving forward, looking at what we got, we said that Arkansas is the only SEC team that made it to the Sweet 16. Well, Joe, what's their gift that they get for making the Sweet 16? They have to play Gonzaga as their first game. And suddenly you feel like there's a very good chance that no SEC teams make the Elite Eight.
Right. It looks unlikely because, Gonzaga has the big advantage down low. Although, of course, Arkansas did beat Auburn this year. That's a great front court. And so, you never say never. And I do think there are some questions about Gonzaga's guard play this year. They're not as good as they were last year without Jalen Suggs, but they're still good. I mean, Andrew Nembhard's a good point guard. But the biggest question I would have about Gonzaga is their poor free throw shooting. They almost lost to Memphis because they missed so many free throws. So if Arkansas can make free throws, they can keep this game close. I think it's close because I think Musselman's a good coach, but I do like Gonzaga to win by 4 or 5 points.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, Arkansas is a tough team because they've won both of their first 2 games by scoring in the 50s. I bet there's probably been less than 5 teams ever in the NCAA tournament that have actually won multiple games in a row while scoring in the 50s. I would venture to say that Virginia and Tony Bennett would probably be one of them because of the style of play they have. But it's a tough thing to do. I think that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for Gonzaga. I mean, we look at the history they've had against the SEC. They got drugged by Alabama this year, by an Alabama team that we saw was obviously a very hot and cold team, but not very consistent. And Arkansas is a team that beat Alabama this year. And, of course, they beat Auburn. And they're a very tough out. And I think that if you see JD Note have a really solid game, if they can hold Timmy down a little bit, because, I mean, Gonzaga was in a rough shape against Memphis. They were losing that game by a lot of points, and Timmy just put the team on his back and did what I thought either Jabari Smith or Walker Kessler would have done for Auburn in that Miami game. And they required every bit of Timmy's performance to win against what ended up being a very gritty Memphis team.
Right. And also, though, that game did play out offensively, the style that Gonzaga is used to. To your question, can they win a game, in the 50s or 60s to Arkansas style?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, you look at what happened against Baylor last year in the finals. Baylor was a very solid defensive team, and they kind of stuck it to Gonzaga. So I'm kind of with you on this one. I told you before, a couple of weeks ago, I've got a ticket right now on Arkansas to win the entire NCAA tournament because I thought they had a lot of value on them as my futures bet. If they can win this game, that certainly, does it. But I still like Gonzaga in this one, but I'm with you. I think that it's going to be somewhere in the 3 to 5 point range, may even be a 1-score game.
Yeah, really entertaining matchup for sure.
And Joe, Duke, of course, one of the big stories in this tournament. Coach K's in his final season, and it almost ended before the Sweet 16, even against Michigan State, and what was just a great matchup. I mean, Tom Izzo is one of the greatest coaches of all time. Of course, Coach K is like a top 3 coach. I would probably put Tom Izzo as a top 10 coach. And you saw a really excellent basketball game. Well, I thought Duke showed a lot of mettle and really kind of showed me that they have the chops to win this tournament. I didn't think they did, but they were playing a very, disciplined, well-coached Michigan State team. Were down by 5 points with a few minutes left and really just put it all together. Banchero went nuts at the end of that game, and Duke looked like a team that could win the national championship in the last couple minutes of a very competitive game against Michigan State.
Right. It's going to be hard to close them out. Like, I know they lost the last game for Coach K at Cameron Indoor Stadium, but I do think in this NCAA tournament, it's going to take a big effort from a team to close them out, just with them wanting to win so much for Coach K. And so, we'll see how they look in their next game, but I think most people are kind of, expecting a Gonzaga Duke Elite Eight.
Well, Joe, the next game I think is going to put a thorn in that side because they're playing Texas Tech, and Texas Tech to me is one of the biggest matchup nightmares in this tournament. They play amazing defense. And I think everybody kind of sold the Red Raider program down the river when Chris Beard left to go to Texas. But their new coach, Adams, has really come in and has just continued what Beard did, and you could argue he's done it better. He beat Chris Beard both times he played him at Texas. And Texas Tech looks like a very good basketball team that I think is going to frustrate Banchero and a lot of the young players at Duke. And Joe, this is one of my bigger upsets. I've got Texas Tech winning this game. And actually, I think that if you look at the line, I think Texas Tech is favored in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. Their head coach, I think, was their defensive coordinator and assistant when they were in the national championship game 3 years ago against Virginia. And so, he's definitely got a wealth of experience there. I can see it going both ways. I do think Texas Tech has a great chance to win, but I do expect Duke to win a really close game and move forward to that Duke Gonzaga Elite Eight game.
All right, Joe, this is the game that I'm looking forward to the most in this entire Sweet 16. And it's the one that Tar Heel Tom is looking forward to the most. Of course, North Carolina did what you and we both picked them to beat Baylor. Now, probably not the way they beat Baylor, where they blew a 25-point lead after Tyler Manick got unceremoniously booted from the game and what really kind of, spurred Baylor's comeback. But a lot of kudos to Hubert Davis in North Carolina for weathering the comeback from Baylor to beat them in overtime. And suddenly, we talked about Kentucky being a blue blood. Well, Joe, the collective blue blood power of their Sweet 16 game is just amazing. And this is the one that I think is premium television watching. UCLA taking on North Carolina. I mean, this is a game that you've probably seen in the Final Four, seen the national championship before. And it's just going to be so much history, and I'm really looking forward to watching that one.
Yes, and what I like about this UCLA team is that, in this era of one-and-dones and players transferring, this is one of those few examples, Dan, where you have a team that made a deep run last year to the Final Four, and now they pretty much ran it back with the same roster intact. Mm-hmm. So these are players, we're familiar with, household names like Johnny Juzang. But I am concerned for UCLA's standpoint because I think Jaquez, his status is either we don't know if he's going to play or if he's going to be as effective after getting injured in their last game. And so I actually am probably going to surprise people by picking North Carolina to win this game. I think that is going to give North Carolina a slim advantage.
Yeah, Joe, when I picked this game in my bracket, I picked UCLA to win it. Because I love the continuity they had from last year with having Jaquez back with Johnny Juzang. And, you always talk about how this is a guard-based tournament. Well, Tiger Campbell is one of the best point guards in all of college basketball. So tough. He reminds me a lot of Jared Harper from Auburn a few years ago. And, I mean, he's a guy that gets the basket, gets his free throws, great distributor. And I really liked UCLA early on to win this game. But Jaquez is a big deal because obviously North Carolina's got a great inside game with Bako, who's one of the best players in the ACC. And, with Manick being such an excellent three-point shooter right now, and RJ Davis playing the way he is, it seems like even though I'd picked UCLA early on, not having Jaquez out there, I think makes a big difference. And so, yeah, I'm actually going to go North Carolina to be the first team from the ACC to make the Elite Eight, and they're going to be joined by Miami in my mind. So I think you at least going to get two ACC teams in the Elite Eight, which is quite a year for a league that probably people weren't expecting a whole lot out of.
Right. And otherwise, if UCLA is fully healthy, I mean, they could win this game. They could win this tournament still. But I do think that North Carolina will win this game. And who will they match up with if they win this?
They won't be playing Duke yet, but there is. If they can make the Final Four, it's going to be a Duke North Carolina Final Four. So you'll get to see it one more time.
Okay. So that'll put, I guess, North Carolina in the Elite Eight. They would face Purdue, St. Peter's, Purdue.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Joe, let's go look at that one. So, of course, the St. Peter's team, they killed the giant that is Kentucky. They beat the little giant in their own state that is Murray State. But now they're taking on a team full of giants. Purdue is one of the biggest basketball teams in America. One thing that Matt Painter does is he knows how to find those 7-footers. And I think he's got like two guys on this roster that are both over 7'1". And Purdue is an excellent scoring team. Jaden Ivey is one of the best guards in the country. They got a lot of big men, but the biggest problem for Purdue is that they are a poor defensive team. And Joe, St. Peter's, are they equipped to take advantage of what is kind of a lackluster Purdue defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem for St. Peter's is they're undersized. So they would have to, in my opinion, be disruptive on defense, but they would also have to get really hot from behind the arc. Their tallest player, I think, in their regular rotation is like 6'7". And you're right, like Purdue rolls out there, with a starting center that's 7'4" and a starting forward that's just 6'11" or 6'10". So that's really tough from a matchup standpoint. And also, Jaden Ivey may be the best player left in this tournament, with some of the other players that have lost in earlier rounds for other teams. And so I think on the strength of Ivey, this Purdue team is going to win this game against St. Peter's pretty easily. And suddenly Purdue has a really good chance to make it to the Final Four.
Yeah, Joe, I'm on this one. I love the story of Shaheen Holloway and of the Peacocks, which is my new favorite mascot. But I think the Peacock is going to go home and it's still going to be able to show a lot of feathers and be proud of their accomplishments. But, yeah, I think Purdue is going to take this because I just don't think that that St. Peter's is going to be able to compete with that size that Purdue is going to throw out there. There's not many teams that can.
Right, exactly.
All right, Joe. Well, we looking at what else we have left. We haven't looked at the other number one seeds. So, of course, Baylor's out. They're the only number one seed that lost. But you still have Kansas left in there. And I think we already talked about Gonzaga. The other one seed that we have left, can't think of it right now.
Arizona,
that's right. So let's look at their matchups, Joe.
So they will play – who do they beat TCU.
Yeah, that's right. They beat TCU.
Okay. Oh, they play Providence.
Okay, that's an interesting game. Joe, Providence was a team that it was a great win for them to win the regular season in the Big East, which has been a good program, a good conference this year. But, Providence kind of limped at the end of the year. They got beat by 40 points in their last regular season game in the tournament. And I actually had them going out in the first round against South Dakota State. But Providence has been pretty commanding in both of their wins, making the Sweet 16. They've got a really kind of interesting story with their head coach, who I'm pretty sure played at Providence and is kind of a homegrown hero. And he's someone that, definitely has a cool program going on there. But it's kind of hard for me to see Providence winning this game against Arizona, who is one of the most talented teams in this field and who, I think I had them making the Final Four. So it's hard for me to – no, that's actually not accurate, Joe. Arizona is taking on Houston.
Yeah, I apologize for that. It just hit me that was I get Providence is playing Kansas.
Providence playing Kansas. Now, Joe, I will say this. I'm not a big Kansas believer. I believe in Arizona. Kansas is a team that, frankly, when I saw them be listed as a one seed, I was kind of weirded out by it. Of course, I wanted Auburn to be a one seed, and I kind of thought that Auburn was a better basketball team than both Baylor and Kansas. Now, of course, Auburn lost that game now, so you can say I was being a little bit of a homer. I still would argue they were better than Baylor. But Kansas is one that I can't shake the fact, Joe, that I saw Kentucky go into Fog Allen and obliterate Kansas. Mm-hmm. You can't get that out of my mind. And suddenly the SEC showed that it wasn't that great of a conference. You know what, Joe? I'm calling upset here. Providence takes out Kansas, and the Friars are going to the Elite Eight.
That would be quite a story. I could see it happening. Ed Cooley, the Providence coach, like you said, he's from Providence, grew up there. He's had this team, led them to a Big East regular season title this year. They're a team that plays good defense, good rebounding, and, those are things that travel well in the tournament. And you also feel like Bill Self, he doesn't probably get enough criticism for the years that they haven't made it to the Final Four. Like, I think he gets to the Final Four 2 or 3 times, but there's been so many years where they lay an egg in like the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight and lose a lot of times when they have a favored team. And so this would be classic Kansas to lose this game. So I could certainly see that, and that would advance Providence to take on the winner of Miami, Iowa State, I think.
Yeah, and suddenly you would definitely have a shocking team in the Final Four. Any of those, I think, would be a big surprise. And, Joe, we were talking about that earlier, how Calipari, what made the St. Peter's upset even more memorable, is the fact that Calipari doesn't go out early very often. Well, you're right. I mean, Bill Self's got a track record of going out early all the time. I mean, he's made some deep runs, but you feel like whenever he has these one seeds, he's one of those one seeds that's very apt to get beat by the 8 or 9 in the second round. And Joe, I see this as a prime upset opportunity for a Providence team who a lot of people doubted, but are suddenly playing really good in this tournament.
Right. And what's the ironic thing about Bill Self and John Calipari is the main reason both of them have a national championship is they beat each other. Like they weren't going to win one without beating each other.
Yeah, that is interesting right there. Well, Joe, going back to Arizona, I think that this, outside of, my fascination of the history of North Carolina taking on UCLA, I think Arizona-Houston is a compelling basketball game. You and I think, I don't know whether you had it, but I had UAB beating Houston in the first round. I think you may have had that one.
I did too. Yeah.
But Houston has looked dominant in their first couple games in this tournament, and they went out and beat a very good Illinois team who had, one of the top 5 players in this tournament in Kofi Cockburn, and is an excellent big center. And Houston's style of just defense and grind it out they're the biggest matchup nightmare to me outside of maybe Texas Tech. I think you can make an argument between the two. And they're a very tough out. And I think that Kelvin Sampson is starting to put himself in position to be a Hall of Fame coach. I mean, you look at what he has done everywhere he's been. He's got this Houston program looking excellent, and they're only going to get better once they get in the Big 12. You go back and you think that he did a lot of stuff at Indiana after Bob Knight left that I'm sure that at the time people weren't really respecting, because I think he was the guy right after Bobby Knight. And suddenly Indiana has just become a shell of itself lately. And Kelvin Sampson has got a really great style that, he has good players, but none of them seem to be stars, and they accepted a role and they played great defense. And I'm a little worried for Arizona in this one, Joe, and I've been really kind of flip-flopping on this one. What do you think on this one?
I think that the winner of this game will make it to the national championship game on that side of the bracket. I'm going to go with Arizona, and it's largely for 2 reasons. One, I had Arizona winning the national championship on my bracket, and so I want to stick with that. Number 2, I really think the way Arizona beat TCU the other night, really in controversial fashion, it was really inexplicable that a foul was not called against Arizona at the end of that game before it went into overtime against TCU. But regardless of that, I came away from that game, Dan, feeling like it's just meant to be for Arizona. Like if they weren't going to go out then, feel like they're just going to kind of keep on advancing. And they kind of have the best team that nobody knows about because they play in the Pac-12 and they're not UCLA. I mean, Mathurin is a great player, like a lottery pick in the draft, and he's an explosive guard with a lot of star power. And so if you look at him, the front court that they have, I think that Arizona is going to get by Houston. But like I said, it could go either way, and I really like the winner to advance to the finals.
Well, Joe, this is one where, I had Arizona going to the Final Four, but I've already gone against myself based on what I've seen. And I think I like Houston in this game because of their defense, because of their coaching, and because of their veteran leadership. They got a lot of the people left from their Final Four appearance last year. And I think Kelvin Sampson has a great chance to play in a national championship and maybe win it this year. And I think the strength of their coaching and their defense and their leadership gets this big upset. I'm actually going to go Houston, making the Elite Eight on this one.
That'd be quite a story. I mean, they had a lot of injuries this year, and so for them to make it back to the Final Four this year would definitely be a huge story for Kelvin Sampson. And I think the winner of Houston, Arizona takes on, the winner of Villanova in Michigan?
That's right. And, Joe, that's the last one we got to talk about today. I think all of us had Villanova making it here. What a great, consistent program that Jay Wright has built. I mean, I think Jay Wright he's definitely a top 10 coach of all time right now. And by the time it's said and done, he'll be top 5, maybe even top 3, I think, with what he's done at Villanova. And this is a standard Villanova team. He has got a method to success, and his teams always fit that bill. They're excellent free throw shooters. I think they're the best free throw shooting team in the country. They have great three-point shooting. That's always there. They're also a underrated defensive team. And, Joe, I think that Michigan has been a very interesting story. I mean, Juwan Howard's kind of making a little bit of a comeback in his public image. Of course, you saw him hugging the Tennessee player after the game, and I think that was a good thing to see. But Joe, he's going to be crying at the end of this one because I think Villanova is about to lay a Philadelphia-sized beatdown on Michigan in this. I really like Villanova in this game, and I'm gonna have to see that Villanova, Arizona, and the Villanova Houston game that I predict in the Elite Eight is going to be great. But I see Jay Wright and his boys laying the smack down on Michigan and making it to the Elite Eight in this one.
Yeah, I like Villanova as well, on the strength of Colin Gillespie and company. They got a lot of momentum after winning the Big East tournament. My only concern for Villanova, and it's the main reason I do think they'll eventually fail to make it to the Final Four in the Elite Eight round, is I am concerned about their front court. Their size compared to Michigan would be a little bit of a cause for concern if it's a close game, because Hunter Dickinson could cause them some trouble down low.
Well, Joe, I think that Hunter Dickinson is going to be a problem, and I think that Michigan will probably hang in there for the first half. But what I see happening in this game is Jay Wright is so smart with the way he constructs things. Is I think that Villanova is going to do to Michigan what Miami did to Auburn, which is as Auburn, Miami got Walker Kessler in foul trouble early and made him sit for large portions of this game. And I think that Jay Wright is going to have his guys go out there and attack Hunter Dickinson and get him in foul trouble early, and he's not going to make that much of an impact in this game.
Well, I can see that, to kind of neutralize that disadvantage or advantage there. That would be key. Like I said, it's all predicated for me on the guard play, similar to Miami if you're Villanova. And if Jay Wright can make a deep run this year, let's say they can make it to a Final Four this year. I mean, imagine what that would do for his legacy, because you're right. Like, he's one of the best coaches. And even though everybody, I think, considers him one of the best coaches, he doesn't get enough credit. Like, think about how highly we regard, the likes of Calipari or especially Tom Izzo, and they just got one national title. I mean, this guy already has two.
He's already got two, and I think he lost another one in the finals as well, correct? I think he's played for three finals and won two of them.
One other Final Four, I think. I think he lost Carolina and Hansbrough in the 2009 Final Four.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Because he had lost North Carolina. I couldn't remember if that was in a championship game or if that was in a Final Four. Because there was a lot of North Carolina UNC games and championships and Final Fours there for a little bit of time.
You're right.
But yeah, no, you're right. I think Jay Wright is a very underrated coach who gets put behind other coaches who has more accomplishments than. I think he's going to show that again this year. And I think that's going to be a great battle with what I foretell happens in the Elite Eight between probably the two most underrated coaches in America, and Kelvin Sampson and Jay Wright.
Right. I mean, really, all these Sweet 16 games, like, I don't know if all of them be close, because I think we expect a couple of blowouts, but all of them have good storylines. Even the St. Peter's game, because of the Cinderella element, like, all of them have great storylines.
Yeah, and I think the St. Peter's game becomes even more interesting because you think, how can they possibly overcome this advantage of being in the redwood forest with these Purdue players and how tall they are? So we'll see what happens with that. Speaking of underrated, I think our show is underrated. We want you to listen some more. If you want to listen to some of our underrated episodes, got them available on Spotify. Search the Dan and Joe Sports Show. You can also check us out on YouTube and what is our growing YouTube channel, the Dan and Joe Sports Show YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show. And of course, you can like our Facebook fan book page. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.